So recently I had the opportunity to shoot a kickboxing event, and this ranged from point scoring all the way through to full contact. And I think there was about 14 fights that needed to be covered. And what we'll be doing is we'll be talking about the things that I needed to do to make sure that I covered the event and basically got all the footage ready for delivery. Now, one of the ways that I undertook this kickboxing event was down to the camera coverage, and what this meant is that I wanted to make sure that I had one camera at front and center of stage so that it got the judges and the ring in full view. And then on the left hand side then I had another camera, and this was capturing both those angles, and that meant then that I was able to get a good selection of shots from a static camera, because it afforded me the ability to then use myself as a third camera and go roaming by the side of the ring so I could get in closer and get more handheld feel and get a lot more of the action shots. And that is how I covered it. Now, one of the things that you need to be very mindful of is that fight events, these are very passionate events, and you get a lot of passionate people who are drinking. So please make sure that if you're going to do this, you have at least 2 to 3 people with you. There was only 2 at the night. And that you sandbag things down and you make sure everything like health and safety is of paramount importance, because like I said, people are very passionate and they don't give a shit about the equipment. And that is not a slight on anybody, but it's just a very realistic look at this to say that you need to make sure that you've got insurance and that health and safety is covered, and yet you put your cameras in a position whereby you're not chasing artistic creation, but you're actually thinking health and safety in mind. If an idiot accidentally knocks this over and it hits his wife and then he kicks off, you better hope to God that you're good at fighting, because they will not care. So yeah, good luck with that. Now, another method that I used to shoot this kickboxing event was the actual aperture. Now, by choosing a deep aperture, this meant that I could leave the cameras focused on a manual spot, which was dead center. I had my partner stand in the center, and all the cameras that were static focused in on my partner. Now, what it meant was, by using a deep aperture, it meant that I had a good range of items or people in focus. The majority of the ring was in focus, which was fantastic, and even at closer to the edges you wouldn't look at it and go, man, that's blurry. So I would definitely pick a deep focus, because you want to make sure that both fighters are in focus, and because we had the multiple angles, this really helped then with one, creating more interest, but keeping everything looking spot on. So I would definitely use a deep aperture. I definitely wouldn't go for like a 1.7, because unless your camera has phenomenal autofocus and you can guarantee that you are going to be making those shots and you got 100% faith in that, try it. But for me personally, I'm always manual focus, and for this I use a deep aperture to make sure everything was covered. Now, one of the methods that I used for shooting this kickboxing event was to implement manual focusing. Each camera was set to the center stage that was static, and that was focusing on my partner, and then that was at 5.6 like I mentioned before. The actual roaming camera itself that I was operating during the entire 14 fights, this was also at 5.6, and this deep focus allowing me to make sure that for the most part everybody, the fighters, were in focus. Now, this was a challenge even at 5.6, because whilst I didn't have to move the lens very far to focus from the back of the ring to the front, they were moving very fast, and this is the first time that I've had to really focus rack that quick between 2 fighters, and between the way they were running from the back to the front to the middle. It was a challenge. So to all you focus pullers out there, I tip my hat to you, because if I had tried to do this with a 1.7, I guarantee you most of the footage would be garbage, because it was difficult trying to keep them in focus. So the trade-off is with the deep focus and using their lights is that you might have to raise your ISO to compensate for the exposure. But the trade-off, because you can use noise reduction, but the trade-off is that you get really good in focus images, which is what you want. You don't want to be distracted by a blurry image, and thankfully none of that happened. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but I'm pleased with my first attempt at shooting a kickboxing event and maintaining good focus throughout using the manual focus racking. But yeah, definitely going to tip my hat to all you manual focus people. That was hard. Yeah, but fun. Now, one of the methods that I've used for this kickboxing event was to use timecode. Now, I've used free timecode in the past and it's always been fantastic, and I love the way that it speeds up my post-editing process. However, I wanted something more secure, and I've invested in timecode. Now, I've purchased the Tentacle Sync and these have been fantastic, but I've got 2 of these and I've got 3 cameras. So the 2 timecode boxes, they were placed on the GH5s. Now one was static and the other one is myself roaming around. The way that I got the other timecode to the G7 is that I have wireless lavaliers. Now what you can do with this is that you can get a splitter cable, pump the timecode into the transmitter. That transmitter then goes to the receiver, which is sitting on the G7, and then you can put that into the audio port, and then that camera then now has timecode. You will get a delay from the time that it obviously gets the timecode to the transmitter, to go to the receiver, to go to the camera. There is a few frames in delay, so you can offset that in post. But for convenience sake, the actual post process, and I didn't have to worry about syncing everything in post because the timecode had it in sorted, and it was more a case about choosing the right camera angles during each of the fights. Now, one of the other methods that I've used for this kickboxing event, it's not the sexiest one, but it's memory management. Now, these are not short events, so when you are covering 14 fights, you pretty much want the cameras to run and keep recording, because if you're doing this on your own, then it becomes a bit of a nightmare to manage. So the 2 GH5s, they have dual recording. You can set these to either backup, where it literally backs up the footage that you are recording at the time, or they do relay recording. So once one card fills up, it then goes to another. Now I'm using 128 gig cards, and based on the settings that I'm using, that typically gives me about an hour and 48. So with the relay recording, it's literally doubling that. So I was able to record the first half of the session, which was the first 7 fights, because then they had an intermission, so I was able to pause those cameras. And it was the same then with the actual GH5 that I was roaming around with. So they were constantly recording, making sure that each fight was covered. The difficulty was the G7. Now this only got 1 memory card slot, so there's no backup option, there's no relay recording. So I had to be very mindful that I had to start that camera when the fight, just about a minute or 30 seconds before the fight was happening, when the fighters were walking in, so that I had that coverage. And then once the fight was done, I was stopping the recording. That managed to last the entire event. I was surprised with that, because I was literally having to manually memory manage that. So you need to be very, very mindful. This is the all importance of choosing the appropriate camera for the appropriate event. Not all cameras are built equal and they all do different things. So I would like to upgrade to another GH5 because I think they're fantastic for these type of things. But in that event, it came down to memory management. Now, you can buy bigger memory cards, so you can buy like a 256 gig. That might be something I will do in the future, but then you're talking about buying 4 or 6 of those just to make sure that you cover things. But I'm finding 128 gig seems to be working really well when I'm covering a wedding full day and all these type of events. So yeah, that's one thing to take into consideration, is actually how long the event is and how you're going to manage that data wise, and does your camera have the capability to actually fulfill that. So those are the methods that I particularly used on the day to shoot this kickboxing event. Just drop down in the comments what have you guys done to shoot these type of events, or similar events where there was a lot of work involved and it was a busy, crowded area. What type of things have you done or employed to make sure that you guarantee that you complete the shoot? And that's it. So if you like this content, please give me the thumbs up, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.